So to start, I would love to learn more about you. Tell me about yourself.
Yeah, so my name is Kasha Patel. I am a science writer during the daytime and a stand-up comedian at night with a specialty in science jokes.
So why did you decide to become a space writer?
So that was kind of fortuitous. I was actually studying to go to medical school in undergrad. I was studying chemistry. I was pre-med throughout my life. I was always volunteering at the hospital, and that was supposed to be what I was going to do. But then around my senior year of college, I was always very interested in writing and in journalism. And I actually started writing for our chemistry department or covering our chemistry department. And it was a lot of fun. The professors really enjoyed it. The people really enjoyed reading the stories about science. And it was like, oh, is science journalism actually a thing? And it was. So I actually found some graduate school programs where I enrolled and I got my master's in science journalism at Boston University. And from there, things just kind of kept going well. While I was in grad school, I got an internship with NASA, which was beyond exciting because when I was young, I only had my number one place that I always wanted to work for was Google. The number two place was NASA. And I mean, if you ask me now, NASA's number one by now. But you know, when we were young, Google was like this new internet thing. It was like so exciting. And they always gave away free tchotchkes, like little things that you could just hang up. Um, but that was very exciting. But now that I'm at NASA, it is extremely, every day is, oh, am I really here? So yeah, I did my internship there. It was a great experience over the summer. I wrote about the Earth Science department, so I wrote about all things Earth science. And I even got to see a rocket launch at the end of my internship. It was actually a rocket that was going to the moon or orbiting the moon. Or it was called Laddie, was the short name for it. And after that summer, I was like, you know what? I had a really good time here at NASA. If I never come back, I think that would be okay because I feel satisfied with the experience that I had. And then when I graduated grad school, I had one more semester. My old boss called me up and said, hey, do you want a job? And I was like, oh, okay, sure. So 7 years later, here I am.
So on that topic, what did your general day-to-day look like as a science writer before quarantine?
Yes. So before quarantine, I every day, so I've actually had a couple of different roles in the past 7 years there, but most recently I work at our NASA online Earth magazine called Earth Observatory. So we actually operate sort of like a newsroom. So every day we wake up and we look for the news of the day. And those can be natural disasters, natural hazards like a fire or a typhoon or something that's really impacting a lot of communities. And we have satellites, we have Earth science satellites orbiting Earth all the time, getting so much data, getting so much imagery that then we try and see, okay, can we see this typhoon? Is there a good shot of it from a satellite? And if there is, we get that shot, we process that satellite imagery, and then I write a story about it to go, later that day, as soon as a few hours, very quickly. We also have longer stories that I pursue. So, there are scientific studies getting published every single day. Sometimes scientists approach us and say, hey, we have this really cool result. Would you like to cover this? Sometimes it's me actually going through the scientific journals and reading through them and seeing, okay, does this look like something that is important, that is relatable, that we think our audience should know about? So it's a lot of kind of putting your feelers out there, trying to see what makes a good story. And for our particular department, we are very visual based. So like I said, we have to have a good satellite image or a good plot, like a decadal trend plot showing, the burned area in California over the past, let's say 20, 30 years. So those are kind of the two things we look for, a good story and a good visual.
Has COVID affected how you guys conduct your job in any way?
A little bit it has. So because my job Well, when we go out to find stories, we find them through really any means. And when I was on the center, when I was at NASA Goddard, there were a lot of scientists that I would just meet up with casually or just pass in the halls, and there would be a lot of seminars, a lot of conferences I would attend. That would be a great place to find story ideas and connect with other scientists. Um, that has been a little harder because of the quarantine. But at the same time, I am very lucky that, I am able to keep writing. I am able to do a lot of video conferencing with the scientists. So, I mean, that thankfully, we have that kind of connection, that kind of communication that we can still continue on. Um, so I think the technology has come so far, and because I'm not necessarily needing like a lot of like intense science programs on my computer, I am able to luckily put out stories for people to read.
So, what would you say is the most challenging aspect of your job?
Oh boy, the most challenging aspect of my job, really every piece of the process can be challenging. Finding the story, finding the right story, and finding it a way to cover it that other people aren't, or sometimes news outlets sensationalize things a lot. So sometimes my job is to kind of push back on that and say, okay, we know what you're hearing in the news right now, but this is kind of a little better context for that. So another challenging part is sometimes the scientific studies that I write about are very difficult to understand because I have a chemistry background and I have a journalism background, and part of the good thing that you learn about journalism is you are constantly, when I'm writing a story and reporting a story, I'm constantly learning all these new informations, and I'm putting my foot in all these different fields that, sometimes I'm going back to reading like biology 101 books and things like that. So it really is quickly reading a lot of stuff and trying to comprehend it. And sometimes when you get really, really difficult scientific studies, finding a way to be able to translate that into a person who was me before I read those books, before I understood what exactly was happening. So in short, I guess what I'm trying to say is finding a way to translate these really difficult scientific concepts can be very difficult at times.
Expanding on the whole news and making it more sensational aspect, how do you balance making it a news story that people want to read and also keeping it scientifically factual? Do you ever need to sacrifice one end for the other, or how do you address that?
Yeah, I would say that there's a lot of information, let's say in a scientific study, and a lot of that is important for the field to continue. For the scientist, they're not necessarily writing for the general public. They have a specific audience in mind. Sometimes that's other scientists, and sometimes that's policymakers. My audience, the people who read my articles are sometimes they're other scientists. Sometimes they're general public people, sometimes they're high school students, sometimes they're college students. A lot of professors use what we write in their classes. And a lot of our stuff also gets picked up by bigger, well, I don't want to say bigger, but national news outlets. So, these New York Times, Washington Post, they also pick up our information. So that's the audience that I aim for. And as I say that, sometimes when I look through a scientific study, if there are too many plots there, if there's a point that the scientist really wants to stress, but it doesn't really make sense to give that piece of information to my audience, then we will leave it out. And it's not like we're leaving out a critical part of the findings of the study. It would be more like, okay, you have 3 charts here. We don't need all 3. Let's take out one and summarize, what are your main points that you want the general public to know? Let's bring those out and put those there. When it comes to news outlets sensationalizing, you see that a lot with, I think, some natural disasters. Sometimes, news outlets want to find the news in something. They want to use the word like first or like biggest. And it's kind of like they get so specific with their superlatives. Like, this is the earliest, this is the earliest hurricane in May that has happened in the first 2 weeks in the past 50 years. And it's just like, okay, you're getting a little too specific. Also, that hurricane is not a hurricane. It's like a tropical cyclone and it's in the middle of the ocean. No one is going to be impacted by it, no communities. So we don't really need to sensationalize this part. But what could be worth looking at is, okay, what are the predictions for the rest of the hurricane season? So it's kind of putting things in perspective that way, because you know, people have enough things to worry about. Oh, I don't need to instill fear on them unnecessarily.
What is the favorite thing you have done or story you have covered as a part of your job?
So actually, going back to my interest in medicine, um, this is kind of neat. So even when I was in grad school, I was still writing. I knew a lot of things about medicine. I knew a lot about the process of getting into medical school. I knew about foreign medical graduates. I kind of took that personal um, interest and experience and wrote about certain healthcare systems. I actually got to go to Kenya while I was in grad school under a Gates Foundation program. It was funded by the Gates Foundation with Boston University. And that was really cool because I actually got to go in a small town in Kenya and report about the Kenyan healthcare system and how foreign aid plays a part. That was years ago, but it's kind of neat because um, I've kind of brought that public health interest along with me throughout all my years. And I would say now, if you ask my team, my colleagues, they'll say like, oh, we all have our specific things we like to write about. And they would probably say that mine is diseases, which is, you know, it's just fascinating to me. So, to some people that's weird, but to me it's so interesting that you could actually use satellite data to track and predict where certain disease outbreaks are going to occur. I recently wrote a pretty long feature. I was working on it for about a year, and I kind of showed 3 different science projects, 3 different scientific ongoing studies about, they created a prediction model to forecast where certain tropical diseases would be. So that would be like Rift Valley fever, that was cholera, that was chikungunya. And it was really interesting to see that, okay, they made these predictions, they made the model, and it actually worked. It came true. They worked with public health officials to prevent those outbreaks, or to, you know, prepare people for a potential outbreak. And it was just really cool to see that the satellite data up in the sky, that, you know, it's actually working to prevent things and help our public health sector, which is something that I don't think a lot of people think of when they think of NASA data.
So, what is one piece of advice you would give to students aspiring to become science writers themselves one day?
Yeah, I would say it's never too early to start trying to practice your communication skills. It's kind of cool because, especially during this quarantine, you've seen people do all kinds of different creative things on TikTok, just like YouTube, Twitter, just like funny jokes. People are so creative. And it doesn't even necessarily have to be science communication at this point. You know, you need to have a foundation of just how to communicate well first. That, you know, if you're in high school, you're in undergrad, college, or even if you're like way past all those things, but you're like, you know what, I want to try this. I would say start practicing on your writing. You can start a blog. In grad school, we were told that we had to have a blog, which was actually a great experience for me because I got to choose what I wanted to write, and then I got some visitors on my website, and that was great. It's not like I got like famous off of that or even a lot of money, but it was more about the experience. And if you are interested in taking a serious step towards science communication, maybe later on, reach out to someone. Feel free to reach out to me. I'm at Kasha Patel on Twitter, and my email is online. Um, so yeah, feel free to reach out to someone and ask for advice, ask for someone to mentor you. There's a lot of programs out there that are dedicated to better science communication.
Well, thank you for your time. That's all the questions we had for the interview.
Cool. Thank you very much. Thank you for having me.